First of all, welcome, and I'm looking very forward to this day. I've loved this series. I've learned something every week, and I've enjoyed being with this great group. I want to introduce each poem before I read it, giving a little bit of background, and then I will read the poem, and we'll have our discussion as we do each week. I'd like you to know in advance that I plan to use a Jungian informed way of discussing the poems, which I will explain when we get to it. But for now, it's helpful to know that I will be guiding the discussion with some questions about images and so forth. So we'll get to that later. The first poem is one that I find very moving the more I read it. It's named Camera Haridwar. Haridwar is a city in India. It is a very holy city. In fact, one of the 4 holy cities that people visit on pilgrimage. It is in the foot of the Himalayas in a very beautiful area. The name Haridwar means gateway to Vishnu, and it's a place where people begin their pilgrimages to a famous temple and also to other holy sites. It's sometimes spelled differently and means gateway to Shiva. It's a home to many temples, this city, and many ashrams, and is one of the 4 holy cities where thousands, even millions of Hindus gather for rituals. And it's also a place where people drink or bathe the water of the holy Ganga, the pure water of the Ganges River in the Himalayas. The water is believed to have healing and purifying properties. These things are helpful to know as background to the poem. Also, the word malas has special meaning in both Hindu and Buddhist traditions in India. Goes back 300 plus years. Malas are strings of beads that are used in prayer and meditation, often to focus attention or intention. The origins and current uses of malas are both Buddhist and Hindu, as I've mentioned, and they can be prayer beads that you pray with, and they can also be worn as jewelry. They come in different shapes and sizes, sometimes formed as more like necklaces, sometimes as bracelets. They are thought to be very powerful. I'd also like you to be aware that Laurie Patton is the author of this book that she wrote in the conclusion of her year in India. She is an anthropologist who studies especially Indian religions. So she's made many visits over many years, interviewing people, visiting sites, observing ceremonies, and so forth. And this poem comes out of her experience there. Camera. Haridwar. Just like the hundreds of Eskimo words for snow, I remember in tired detail the stories of the people who feared a picture would steal the soul. As you and I exchange malas and strangers' glances, you put your feet into the light water, God's water, pieces of sky, dished out by the mountain. I raise the lens to focus, and your hand shoots out, demanding money, laughing. We both know you will be circulated, reproduced in basements and sad lecture halls, where in photo form you will no longer demand. Your demand is its own form of light and intimacy. We both know once I shoot you, it will not be you, but I, waiting after you, who has lost the soul. I invite you now to enter the discussion. You can leave this on the screen, Patricia, if you'd like, but I invite you to enter the discussion by speaking out single words or images that strike you. Don't think about this. This is the Jungian approach, a Jungian approach, but don't think about it. Just name a word or image that jumped out at you. And I think rather than raising hands this time, I'll ask you to just jump in, and because we'll hear it from as many as we can.
Pieces of sky dished out.
Shoot you.
Eskimo.
Waiting after you, who has lost the soul.
Light and intimacy.
Laughing.
God's water.
Now I'll read it one more time. I found that helpful last week when we had 2 readings. So I'm going to read it one more time. And again, just give yourself to it. Don't worry about thinking. Camera. Haridwar. Just like the hundreds of Eskimo words for snow, I remember in tired detail the stories of the people who feared a picture would steal their soul. As you and I exchange malas and strangers' glances, you put your feet into the light water, God's water, pieces of sky, dished out by the mountain. I raise the lens to focus, and your hand shoots out, demanding money, laughing. We both know you will be circulated, reproduced in basements and sad lecture halls, where in photo form you will no longer demand. Your demand is its own form of light and intimacy. We both know once I shoot you, it will not be you, but I, waiting after you, who has lost the soul. Now, Patricia, you might take off the screen now if you don't mind. Thank you. That's grand. And I now invite you to share feelings that were stirred in you by this poem. Don't think too hard. Again, I'm inviting you just to name the things that came forth briefly, and we'll come back and reflect a little more.
Elizabeth, when I heard pieces of sky dished out by the mountain, it just felt like this abundant, gracious, gentle gift that the earth gives us.
I felt a concern for the woman being photographed, wondering, if she was acting with integrity to permit this.
I felt that what you were saying too, Patricia, but also both a sense of sadness, but also there seemed to be at the very beginning when they're exchanging malas and looking at each other like strangers, you get a sense that there's an understanding. At first I thought this was because they were exchanging malas, they knew each other. And then you realize it's a stranger. And then there's this exchange of money and the kind of perhaps sadness around it that the person loses, quote, their personhood. But I will say, if I have been so deeply touched by the photographs of people around the world, and I have a friend who's a brilliant photographer, and I've been to exhibits where you look, you are losing this. And photographs do get used for purposes that are dehumanizing, but they're also can be extraordinary portals into other people's souls, and at least see human beings and as a radiant or a deep or even a sorrowful aspect of them that's profound. So again, it's a complicated poem, and in some ways I want to argue with that at the end, but I also understand what she's saying too.
I want to say I wasn't clear that there was an exchange of money or that they weren't friends. I'm left in ambiguity. That's not a bad thing, but I don't. Yeah, it wasn't clear to me that there was an exchange. There was laughter, but I didn't know if maybe that was a joke, that was a kind of teasing. I probably need to read it again 4 times.
But the feeling of ambiguity is a real feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other feelings?
I liked, or it intrigued me at the very end where it says it will not be you, but I, waiting after you who has lost the soul. And to me, photography obviously can be extremely intimate and show a lot about a person. But when that person walks away or wades away, I would think that you've actually lost the intimacy of the in-person encounter. And maybe that's what she means. I waiting after you who has lost the soul. The person is still, waiting out, and the photograph is still, though. And even though it's wonderful, there's the essence of the soul, the actual human, that's not there anymore.
So, Tina, you've moved us into the third question, which is reflections on what this poem speaks to you or how you interpret it. Thank you for that. And Kathleen?
I was going to say at the end, it is also ambiguous. It is I who has lost the soul of the person, or have I lost a bit of my soul? Mm-hmm. I think sort of that's kind of what, implication of what maybe Tina was saying too.
Yes. So let's continue on. What is stirred for you? Oh yes, Patricia.
I just want to bring Bethlehem Center did a good job of grounding us in the places where we live, and somebody from Canada has pointed out that the use of the word the E word used for Inuit people is sometimes considered offensive. So I just want to note that, and that was a very helpful note from Kendra. Thank you.
The which word did you say, Patricia?
She referred to it as the E word. The name used in the second line of the poem is considered offensive to some folks.
Thank you.
I just wanted to comment on this interesting relationship that you have. I'm really drawn to the lines that say, your demand is its own form of light and intimacy. That really spoke to me about that, because it is, you're left with, there's a bemusing kind of response from the photography. but it's kind of light and playful. But anyway, that really caught me. Your demand is its own form of light and intimacy.
Yes. Others.
Mary Elizabeth, on the lines that use the word demand, can you show that again real quick? Do you mind?
Yes.
Is that possible, or just real-
Patricia, is that possible to show it again?
You know, I didn't know whether if you would hesitate that you will no longer demand. Your demand is its own form of light and intimacy, or you will no longer demand your demand. Is it some? I didn't know how close the two lines would be to one another, and it kind of made a little question, another question in me about the joint use of the word demand. You can take that off, Patricia, now. I just thought it was really interesting verbally.
Let me share a screen because the spacing is lost in the one that was on the screen. Patricia, can you give me permission to share a screen? It's very relevant to the point you're making.
Mhm.
And in the meantime, I want to go back to what she's, oh, you've already given me permission?
Yes, you should be able to share.
Okay, here we go. Can you see this? I think this helps. The first stanza is this musing from the large setting. The second stanza, and let me mention that the E word is very interesting, and I want to come back to that. This second stanza is about the exchange that they've had, the way they've already greeted and related with one another. The third stanza is a description of the photography, and then we go down to the reality of what happens to the picture. Laurie Patton is an anthropologist, so I think she's noting the ironies that all of you have already lifted up, and the ambiguity in the relationship between the people who are being engaged and the person who's doing a study. And so she's acknowledges this in terms of the basements and sad lecture halls. Then your demand, and here's your point, your demand is its own form of light and intimacy. That stanza speaks to the person's demand.
I see. Uh-huh.
And then we move to quite a different stanza we both know.
Mm-hmm.
Does that feed your
Yeah,
reflection
I
any
see.
further?
Well, it makes clear that you read it exactly the way it is naturally read. And yeah, I see that.
Yes, I had to read it many, many times to follow her pauses and her flow.
Mm-hmm.
So your point is well taken.
Mm-hmm.
And could I go back to the E word for just a moment? I think it's very interesting that you've raised that. And I think it raises an irony that's actually outside the point. The irony of us as readers. So she's standing in a poem within a very complex intercultural context. And she's describing ironies within that context. And yet, we as readers pick up ironies that come from our context. So in a sense, we're really part of the poem. Mm-hmm. And we are experiencing ironies that she probably did not intend. But if a poem is more than the poem itself on paper, but it is also an engagement between author and written poem and reader, then those ironies are going to come up. So I'm glad you've raised them. And Kendra, you have the last word on this poem.
I'm the person who raised the issue about describing Inuit in this poem, and I would suggest that this is not an irony that we're experiencing as part of reading the poem, but this is a justice issue that needs to come forward as we explore poetry and contexts within which we are not situated. I believe that as we reach into these other contexts, and in this case, we are reaching through somebody else who is also reaching into both the context of Inuit people and into Haridwar. And we need to be sensitive to the fact that someone who is reaching into these contexts that are not their own 20 some years ago will perhaps produce images that in this day and age are not useful and do not help us to imagine ourselves richly. And this poem, I think, has some really beautiful elements to it, but the fact that it described Inuit people in a racist, colonial, and derogatory term on the second line, I was closed to the rest of its messaging. And that is really important, especially as we are thinking about journeying with people and welcoming them into a space of wonder and journeying. My orientation to ministry and to spiritual work is that it's our job to make that as safe and as welcoming as possible. And for me, this poem did the opposite.
Thank you. That is a very good poem, a very good point. And I appreciate your raising it with such strength. Thank you very much. And now we'll move to the second poem. Let me stop sharing so Patricia can share.
I'm happy to share, Mary Elizabeth. I'm wondering if the second poem has any issues with spacing. It's shorter, so let me know if we need to use your version.
I can always put my version up if you wish. The spacing is there on this one.
Okay.
Excellent.
I think sometimes in the translation to our shared Google Docs, some things get lost. Sorry about that.
That's right. It does. This second poem doesn't require such long introduction, but I do want you to know that the author, Sadi, is a Sufi poet of the 13th century whose home was Shiraz, Iran. And you might be interested to know that Sadi is an Arabic word often translated as lucky or righteous. Humanity and suffering. Humanity are members of one body, created out of the same essence. When one member of the body feels pain, others remain distraught. You, unfeeling to the suffering of others, are unworthy of the name human. Words and images that jump out at you?
Human.
You.
Unfeeling, unworthy, name.
Distraught.
Essence.
What feelings are stirred in you by this poem?
Injustice,
Judgment.
Yeah,
And judge-
judgmental. Casting out.
judgmental.
Shame.
Empathy.
It evokes the feelings I'm having listening to my Jewish and Muslim friends talk about the war of confusion and complicated.
Let me read it one more time and then we'll turn to interpretation. Humanity and suffering. Humanity are members of one body, created out of the same essence. When one member of the body feels pain, others remain distraught. You, unfeeling to the suffering of others, are unworthy of the name human. You can take it off now, Patricia. Thank you very much. So what interpretations or ideas are stirred in you by this point?
The first 4 or 5 lines really resonated with me and reminded me of John Donne's poem, No Man is an Island. And then, of course, the ending to me is saying, if you can't relate to other people's suffering and have compassion, then you are inhumane.
So this sense of community, wholeness, and brokenness. Others?
I feel like it. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Rachel?
I feel like
And then
it's,
Kathleen.
it's a call in some ways to, the beginning part is to have empathy for other human beings. But it also points to the fact that all of us, in our humanness, sometimes are the you that the finger is pointing at.
So you could, does that mean, Rachel, that you could identify with the unhuman, the one unworthy of being human?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
What an open, honest reading of the poem. Kathleen?
well, I would say then we are all unworthy. I think we're part of our being human is that we're capable of so much of those complex parts of ourselves. And so I struggled with the judgment at the end. I mean, I think that we're both. And the judgment at the end is I bristle against it for both sides. And how do we quote, pray for our enemies when we are also our own enemies? If we take this attitude, I don't think we can cast people out of humanity or cast people out in this way. So I really struggled with the poem ultimately.
Very interesting. And the struggle is the judgment element?
I know.
Is naming can be a form of calling people into belonging, and naming can also be a way of casting people out. So saying someone isn't worthy of this name, or saying we're not going to name them, or they don't, I think that's a very serious thing to do. It's been done to human beings since time began.
Very, very powerful comment, Kathleen. Thank you. Donald, and how do you pronounce your name, Donald?
Donald
Great.
Walter. I'm just curious if this is a translation, and if so, would that make any difference in our understanding of it?
It is a translation, and I think you're raising a good question. I don't know the answer. I do know that these translations are done by people who are very fluent in Arabic, and they've been worked on by multiple people, so they're not tossed out. But your question is a good one. I might say how I identified with it, which I also felt the judgment, but I think it bothered me less than it did some of you, because I'm so troubled by the world we're living in right now and the lack of feeling for people who are different or who we've identified as less than human or are culprits, or the blaming and the blaming and scapegoating of whole groups of people is so distressing to me right now. That judgment felt real. It didn't feel like it was separating out just one group. It felt like it was a judgment that hits me and hits all of us when we fall into that pit of judging others and escalating violence as a result.
It's like he's dehumanizing those who dehumanize. There's always a reason why someone is the way they are and may lose empathy and numb out and go into a place of hatred and lack of feeling. So there's a circular nature to it for me. There's a judgment. There's a dehumanizing of the dehumanizer.
Great point.
Someone's knocking at my door. I just have to check on something.
Thank you.
And just to note what Roger says in the chat, it reminds me of saying, I'm not judgmental except about judgmental people, which is what Karen is saying.
Yes.
For me, one of the very important roles of poetry in our world is to help us learn what it means to be human. And in this age of technology and artificial intelligence, a poem that asks that question is also always a good thing, I think.
Good point. That's a good stopping point on that poem. And we don't finish any of these poems, but we pause as we move to the next one. I'll give you a warning in advance that the author of this poem is Natalie Diaz, and she is writing from a Native American point of view, and she is using the word American and America for the whole of the United States and not for the whole of what is America. So I'll pass that warning out in advance. I'd like you to know just a little bit about Natalie Diaz. She's is Pima and Mojave. She grew up on the Fort Mojave Indian Reservation in Needles, California, which is very much in the desert, and is a member of the Gila River tribe. Her book, from which this poem comes, is called Post-Colonial Love Poem, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. So this is a fairly new poet on the scene, and her poetry is being highly commended. American Arithmetic. Native Americans make up less than 1% of the population of America, 0.8% of 100%. Oh, mine efficient country. I do not remember the days before America. I do not remember the days when we were all here. Police kill Native Americans more than any other race. Race is a funny word. Race implies someone will win, implies I have as good a chance of winning as. Who wins a race that isn't a race? Native Americans make up 1.9% of all police killings, higher per capita than any race. Sometimes race means run. I'm not good at math. Can you blame me? I've had an American education. We are Americans and less than 1% of Americans. We do a better job of dying by police than we do existing. When we are dying, who should we call? The police? Or our senator? Please, someone, call my mother. At the National Museum of the American Indian, 68% of the collection is from the United States. I am doing my best to not become a museum of myself. I am doing my best to breathe in and out. I am begging, let me be lonely, but not invisible. But in an American room of 100 people, I am Native American, less than one, less than whole. I am less than myself, only a fraction of a body. Let's say I am only a hand, and when I slip it beneath the shirt of my lover, I disappear completely. Words and images that stand out for you.
Grace,
I'm doing my best to not become a museum of myself.
and then the irony of race implies someone will win.
Please, someone, call my mother.
Let me be lonely but not invisible.
I am less than myself.
And what feelings are stirred for you?
I find this poem quite touching because it really triggers some of my own history. I wrote a master's thesis interviewing a First Nations man with quadriplegia who'd always said he was in a car accident. And through my interviews with him, he told his life story, and it came out that he had been beaten in police custody. So this is quite emotional for me to read this.
Thank you for that, Tina.
Here.
Other feelings?
Sadness.
I feel anger. Anger at the injustice.
As you take a deep breath and we move into interpretations and reflections about the ideas here, I suggest, Patricia, that I share my screen again in order to get the spacing.
And Mary Elizabeth, if when you're sharing your screen, you can full screen that, your screen, we'll be able to see more. I don't know if that's
Oh,
possible.
okay. Thank you for that. Then I need to unshare, don't I, and share again. And I'll also, for reading's sake, I had, okay, here we go. For reading's sake, I had enlarged the print. So is this better?
Yes, it's somewhat better. Thank you.
Okay. What reflections are stirred for you? What responses do you have to the poem, and what responses do you see within the poet?
I found the poem really informative. I wonder if the data that she's summarizing would be accurate today. I would have predicted that police kill more African Americans than Native American, and I could be totally wrong.
The poem is relatively new. I can't tell you what data pool she was using, though. That's a good question.
I think she qualifies it by the per capita statement, and just in the consideration of how few Native Americans make up.
Yeah.
Well, what really struck me was when we are dying, who should we call? You know, the people that the system has in place to protect do not protect us. You know, the police or our senator. Will there be political solutions, or, you know, please someone call my mother? That's just very moving.
Mhm.
And Karen in the chat, Julie says the repeated word America is a focus on a country that does not see them. So that is an addition to what you're saying.
Yes. So I'm going to take it off the screen now so that we can see one another.
Hey, Elizabeth, can we see that last line again, just before you
Sure.
do? That's good. Thank you.
I have a question about that last line. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go on, Kathleen. Thank you.
I know a little bit of something about the poet, and I'm wondering if I'm reading into the last line. Why does she disappear completely when she's with her lover?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm bringing something to this that I know. She's lesbian. And a lot of this book is a love poem to the person who she loves. And so I'm wondering if she feels even more invisible, you know, because of that. I don't know. I could be completely wrong.
If I could ask a question related to that, I didn't know whether to read the last line as sad or happy.
I didn't either. It's a really
sad or happy.
Yeah.
Because when in a moment of intimacy, when you slip your hand beneath the shirt of your lover, there is a kind of falling away of, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. It's a kind of disappearing of something. So I felt like the last line was really powerfully ambivalent.
Mhm. Yeah, and if I can just, I will be quiet after this, but there's a sense to me in this poem of both belonging, quote, this is her country, United States, but there's not a sense of belonging to it, and there's not a sense of having the United States feel like she belongs. And then she keeps asking questions, who does she belong to in this?
Mm.
I mean, she doesn't want to belong to a museum. She belongs to her mother. There's that, she belongs to these people, and also there's that sense of belonging with the lover. So in a way that speaks to what you're saying, Jay. I think the movements back and forth between the questions and the calling out and the statistics and sort of it has a sort of relentless movement. It's complicated and so compelling because of it. It's certainly never simple.
And kind of a shift between third person and first person, between analyzing the world out there and speaking from a perspective of lived experience in the first person. There's a shift back and forth for me. I don't know why.
Yeah. I think
I am begging, let me be lonely but not invisible. That's first person.
Yeah.
In an American room of 100 people, I'm Native American, that's a little more third person-ish, analytical.
That's true. Yeah.
Can I comment just quickly on the last line? I find it
Yes.
quite powerful. I find it quite powerful, and it completely shifts to a different tone. I find it that it's almost redeeming, reclaiming, and taking back power.
Mm.
She's saying, if I'm only a hand, if I'm only the fraction, this is what this hand will do. It will live this full, sensual, life. I think it's quite powerful. If I'm only a hand, it completely shifts the tone. She reclaims, I think.
And Karen, say more about how it shifts the tone.
Well, I mean, everything is so arithmetical, whatever the word is, mathematical in the beginning. It's and then it shifts to this sensual, lived experience, this very embodied experience. This, yeah. So it feels like she's, it's jarring actually. The shift from it's almost like two separate types of poems, but it's jarring in a way that I just feel it's very powerful, the last one. Yeah. If I'm only a
Thank
hand,
you.
this hand is going to, this is what this hand will be, this, sensual, relating, whatever.
Someone else had their hand up, and I don't see it now.
Well,
It was Dan Reamer, and then maybe Julie.
And Dan,
Well,
thank you.
I was focused on the last line as well. And I saw it as a claiming of power, a claiming of agency. The poem is so much about discrimination, oppression, discount, everything that people do to me. But even if I'm only a hand, boy, can I do something with that hand. Very empowering.
Thank you for that. And did someone else have their hand up? I hadn't seen another hand. Patricia, who is that?
I believe Julie Foster wanted to speak.
Oh, great. Julie?
I think it's just been spoken. For me, from Canadian perspective, I never hear of the First Nations, even of their dying by the police. There is, in the United States, there's very little spoken about the First Nation communities. That's a generalization. I mean, the First Nations people themselves are speaking out, and she speaks out. But the last line I thought was beautiful and empowering as well. She's not seen, the First Nation people are not seen through the racism, and yet if she's only 0.8. And if she's only that percentage in that mathematical calculation and only a hand, then that hand is joined with the lover, and she can disappear in the love and the connection and the sensuality.
Thank you for that. I had one other interpretation of that last line because I had recently read some of her other poetry, including one in which her mother warns her against being deluded by falling for white men and wanting the sensual sexual experience with white men. And so I was influenced by that as I read this last line, thinking that it could also mean a loss of self, a loss of self to the lover, which I think maybe highlights the richness of that last line because of its openness to so many different interpretations. Anyone want to give a last word before we move to the last poem? Then, since my share screen is already up, I'm just going to go to the last one, and we'll do what we've done in other sessions. I will be brief, and we'll be brief in the discussion. I will say that Claude McKay, you see here that his life spanned 1890 to 1948, was born in Jamaica, and he lived in Jamaica through his young adulthood. He was born in a mostly Black area of Jamaica where he was surrounded by Black people. And then he moved to Kingston as a young adult to work, and he discovered in a mostly white city that he experienced extreme discrimination. And then when he moved to the U.S., he experienced even more, whether in Alabama or Kansas or New York City. So he was actually someone who was stirred toward social visions, and he was a major leader in the Harlem Renaissance, which sought to uplift Black peoples and to cultivate and encourage the art forms that Black people were creating. I know my soul. I plucked my soul out of its secret place and held it in the mirror of my eye, to see it like a star against the sky, a twitching body quivering in space, a spark of passion shining on my face. And I explored it to determine why this awful key to my infinity conspires to rob me of sweet joy and grace. And if the sign be not fully read, if I can comprehend but not control, I need not gloom my days with futile dread, because I see a part and not the whole. Contemplating the strange, I'm comforted by this narcotic thought. I know my soul. And we'll just skip to one question. What is stirred in you by this point?
Everything.
Awful key to my infinity. The whole thing is incredible, each line.
Terror and beauty and knowing and unknowing.
Mm. Mm.
This poem is reminiscent of a notion that's developing in those supporting oppressed communities is called constructive resilience. It's the capacity to take oppression and use it as a source of energy to grow and advance. And I think constructive resilience is what is reflected in this poem. I know my soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The line "to see it like a star against the sky" reminds me of that poem that I led about love means to learn to look at yourself the way you look at distant things. And this seems so true, that there are moments where I can glimpse my soul and understand it as this beautiful thing. And then sometimes I only see the part of it, but at least those moments where we actually know ourselves and glimpse ourselves are such beautiful things to hold on to and remember.
How do you read twitching body quivering in space?
Say that again, Jay. I missed.
How does everyone read a twitching body quivering in space?
We're part of the cosmos.
I read it differently, as lynching.
Mm.
Oh,
I'm sorry to say, I don't want us to end on that note, but that's how I read it.
yeah.
Yeah. And so how did that, how did you interpret "conspires to rob me of sweet joy and grace"?
I think I focused on that line a bit as well, Jay. The "conspires to rob me of sweet joy and grace," and all throughout the poem, the poet is coming from first person. So looking at his soul and then trying to determine why there was an awful key, even brings in that word awful key to my infinity. And then that conspiring to rob me of sweet joy and grace. Even though he's looking from within, everything that we are within has been influenced by what is without, what is around us, what is, what experiences we've had, what exposures we've had. And I have, it just makes me think of children in elementary school when I see that line, and how they come in and they really are so innocent and full of joy and grace. And I've worked with a lot of African-American children, and they just have that joy and, that grace about them. But there seems to be this outward, almost robbing of that joy and grace as they begin to grow older.
Reinforcing what you said, Rachel, and what you said too, Jay, he does go through different images there. A star against the sky, the twitching body, a spark of passion. These are very different images. And the points that the two of you are making help shed light on the line "conspires to rob me of sweet joy and grace." Otherwise, you don't see the conspiring, but when you put those together and the interpretations the two of you have given, that really underscores the conspiratorial aspect.
And then, because I see a part and not the whole, contemplating the strange.
Yeah.
I'm comforted by this narcotic thought. I mean, what lines?
Yeah. When I first, the line that really, I found a twitching body quivering in space was terrifying, actually. It wasn't, and I didn't connect it to what Jay was talking about. And then when you said that, Jay, it was like, oh my gosh, because it's the one place where he really, he talks about I, but he's talking a lot about feelings and soul. And that's the one place where it gets physical, and a twitching body is not a pleasant thing. It is really painful. That's a really painful image. So that I think there's something to that reading, and thinking about if that reading is if that's something of what he's thinking, then that connects him to his death and his mortality, and to the infinity, and to his soul. But it's not a sweet way. I mean, it's thinking about that is a way that robs one of joy and grace. And then at the end, it's when he says narcotic thought, I think, oh my goodness, is he thinking maybe he's only fooling himself? Maybe this is just an illusion. This poem gets ever more complex the more we read it. It's beautiful. I mean, it's so I mean, it just draws everything out of you. And you realize that it draws everything out of you. I can relate to all this, but then there's this depth of it that is not mine. That is the experience of an African, of a Black man, and what this might mean. It just takes us a little ways into that. It just makes you want to weep. It makes me want to weep. This is,
What you're saying echoes the course of his life, in which he experienced an enormous amount of discrimination and oppression, and also an enormous amount of safety and home.
Leo puts a very lovely note of finding some threads, contemplating the strange. He said, "Strange Fruit" is a song that protests the lynching of Black Americans, written and composed by Abel Mirapool, a white Jewish communist teacher from the Bronx, who published it as a poem in 1937, recorded by Billie Holiday. The song uses a metaphor of fruits hanging from the trees to describe the horrific scene of lynching victims. So,
Thank you for that. A very important connection. Thank you. With that, we'll close because the time is up. I want to say thank you to all of you. You are such thoughtful people who think down into your own souls and think together with this poetry. Every week, you're just astonishing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Elizabeth.
yes, thank you so much.
thank you.
I like every poem you chose, Mary Elizabeth, and it reminds me, they all left me with ambiguity. You know, no sense of closure, of a fixed understanding,
Yeah.
which I think is great, but necessary.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Yeah.
It keeps us all in process.
Mhm.
Yes, and
Thank you for the background and all the poets too. And the writing was very, very rich, very helpful.
oh, good. Thank you, and y'all have a great week.
Thank you. Kathleen, can you stay on for a second?
Sure.
And actually, Patricia, if you can stay on too.
Sure.
Kathleen, I am going to Rhode Island tonight, actually, to see my grandson, and coming back Monday. But I know that Patricia needs the poems for next week by Friday. Is that correct?
I like to get them Thursday if I can. I send them to Bethlehem Center on Thursday, and then they go on Friday.
Kathleen, would it be remotely possible for you to do the whole thing?
Well, it's so interesting because I had such a hard time making decisions. I spent so much time choosing two poems. So I have more than I have a bunch. I can do it.
Can you? Okay, it would really help me. I appreciate it. To take that little thing off my shoulders. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yes. I actually have 5 poems and I was trying to put them together and I was
great.
I chose to, so I can. And one was such a painful poem, but so I didn't put it in, but maybe, when you can only choose two, you don't.
Yeah.
If you choose one painful poem, then maybe the others have got to balance it out. So maybe I can. I don't know.
Well,
Okay.
anyway, if you would, so Patricia, next week is Kathleen, if that's okay.
Sure. And I was trying to move people to the waiting room so we could have a private conversation. And I missed what you said was happening in your life.
It's just, I have a 6-month-old grandson in Rhode Island, and my wife and I are flying up to be with them for 3 days. And I have had it in my mind, I've got to recommend some poems in a timely way. But it's actually this afternoon is the only time I could do it with any degree of ease. And so I thought that maybe if I could convince Kathleen that there would be a God after all.
But will you be at class next week, Jay?
I will.
Okay.
It's just that I can't take the time to choose the poems. That's the only issue.
So Kathleen, I
Kathleen,
talked to Jay.
we're with pros. Y'all have done such great jobs. Really. I mean,
Kathleen,
I feel like, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I just think you're all doing such a wonderful job. I didn't realize what expertise we have.
I love the different voices and the different the different ways that people ask questions and, draw us into the poems.
I have a little, on the first one with the E word, I have a colleague where I teach at Hendrix who was teaching the history of jazz and reading a book on the history of jazz. And it did not use the bad N word. It used the word Negro. And that was part of the way of speaking when the text he was using was written. And the author may well have been African-American. I really don't know. But he asked his students to read from the text so they could discuss jazz. And a student balked at that word, and she would not read that word. And then from then on, because other students had to read from the text, they would not read it either. And it put my professor, my friend, in a bit of a bind because he felt bad about that, asking someone to read something with a word. But he said, but they don't think in terms of historical context. They don't think in terms of that. And I wondered a little bit about that with our first poem also.
I understand what the speaker was saying, but at every point in history, doesn't matter where you are, the people that seem to understand a culture or something the most at the present, have the most insight or be closest to it, at another time, someone's going to look at us or them and say, you didn't get it right. So we want to get rid of that. And my son is a historian. And so history and how we see things through history is terribly important. There was a teacher at Columbia who lost her job because, did you know the story?
No.
I don't know if she got suspended, but she was teaching, she just said the name of James Baldwin's book in class, I'm Not Your Negro. And she got in trouble for that. And she was just saying the title of it. And I do understand these sensitivities, not being Black and everything, but.
She got in trouble for saying the title of the book?
Oh. So I can respect, I'm not going to say it because I'm white, but the book is there and it's his book.
Yeah.
So, it's a difficult issue.
It is.
There's a further layer upon it. I didn't want to say anything after, which was a good thing for us to be reminded of. But the idea that the Inuits have 100 names for snow, I have also read that that's a myth, that's not really true. And that by Inuit writers. So, we have so many layers of information and And
I'm so naive, Kathleen, but I favor a hermeneutics of kindness.
yeah,
And so I favor giving people the benefit of a doubt.
Mm.
And if for some reason they erred in a choice of words, if their intentions were not malevolent,
Mhm. Mhm.
we need a world where there can be a hermeneutics of kindness,
Yeah,
because there's so much judgment. And this is kind of the Buddhist in me, but I think there's a little Jesus here too. This is love your enemy, you know.
yeah.
Let's lighten up with each other. We need that.
And you know, if we get all tight and reified or take a position and get, I mean, if we feel offended or we bristle at something, if we go off in our corners,
Yeah,
that hermeneutics of kindness is what allows us to have a conversation.
right.
Tell me what it feels like to have you say this. You know,
Yeah.
what is this? You know, that poem about by Natalie Diaz. You know, in Rochester, we sort of had our own. I don't know if it really made the news, but we had our own George Floyd in the name of Daniel Prude. I don't know if anyone knows that story. He was African-American man, actually lived in Buffalo. He was coming back here to see family. He'd been in Chicago. He was mentally ill. He came here. He was having some mental health problems. He was out on the street. He started losing control. And the police, he was naked.
Uh-huh.
And the police hooded him. They partly strangled him. They laughed at him. He ended up in University of Rochester Strong Memorial Hospital. He died 5 days later. And unbeknownst to him, he had I guess a nephew who didn't know who he was taking care of at first. He was a neurosurgeon fellow. He was in his fellowship year, African-American, and his last name was Prude also. And he took care of him and discovered he was a relative.
Mm.
And he later wrote, well, he spoke to the Greater Rochester community of churches here, and I heard him speak that night. And he also wrote, you can find it in the American Journal of Medicine, he wrote an essay. And what he pleaded for was for the police and people to listen to the story. Listen to the story someone's trying to tell you. As they're flailing around, just listen to the story before you start, you know.
Well,
I think that's been one of the tricky parts of my new job of the Interfaith Center is so many people aren't listening, right? And if we get something wrong, we get really scared and tight if we don't understand something. And so listening becomes a very challenging and difficult skill that we don't have a lot of in this world. So I think you're right.
Yeah, I want to. Amen. There's no further comment. Amen. Patricia, how are the Jews and the Muslims getting along in Little Rock?
I thought we were doing great. Rabbi Block came to an iftar dinner at Medina, a mosque, and brought the Methodist bishop and several members of his congregation, and it was really beautiful. And we sat in a circle and ate and talked. But then I reached out to several people to see if we could pray together regularly over the next few months. And that brought up all kinds of judgment and fear. And I'll pray with you if you will say we need a ceasefire, things like that, some demands and some conditionalities. So it's real tenuous.
Among
and
the
it's-
Muslims saying that to the Jews, or Jews saying that to Jews?
Muslims saying it to Jews, but I've also heard some pretty strong judgment from the Jews to the Muslims. So it just is bringing up a lot of fear, a lot of pain. And our community actually has members, both in our Jewish community and in our Muslim community, has members there on the ground. So this isn't a distant fight. This is a fight
Yeah.
where family members are dying, and it just, people can't have dialogue when you're in the middle of a war, and it's very difficult. So there are a few moments of joy and a few moments of connection. So I'm trying to build on those as much as I can.
I know some fairly well, some that you're working with on the Jewish side and the Muslim side. And I just love them all. But one has a relative in the IDF, in the Israeli army.
Yep.
And others have had friends die in Gaza.
Yep.
And others on the Jewish side had people they knew that were killed on October 7th. And so they're bringing so much. It's a real challenge to know what interfaith can mean.
Right.
Yeah.
And we tried.
Just one last thing. One of my most instructive things was reading about a group of Palestinians and Gaza citizens that had both, Jews and Palestinians in Gaza that had both had people killed in previous violence. This was before October 7th. And so they got together and set up a group. What they shared was mourning. But then what they said, this was what was so interesting. They said, this does not mean that we have affection for each other. This does not mean that we are friends in some idealized sense, but this does mean that we will not kill each other. And our best hope for peace is to coexist, agree that we don't like each other, and not be violent. And I thought, wow, so all this togetherness, and that's what you ended up concluding. I was expecting to hear sisterhood and brotherhood and conviviality and shared meals and come on over for this holiday. I'm sure they do that, but this was a much more jaded view of what you can actually hope for, and it's that we will coexist and not kill each other.
That's really a beautiful take to put the bar there.
Yeah, it's to lower the bar.
Oh, that's powerful.
I think
if you can begin, if you can start at a place, if you didn't even have a place like that, what you're doing is like you're saying, oh my God, I never thought that would be a place. That's not what we envisioned, but that is a place even probably extraordinary for some people to come to.
Yes, it's coexistence.
And maybe build from there, but it's going to take so long. And I
Well,
have Jewish
really.
friends in Rochester. I grew up probably in the suburb where I grew up. It was probably 30% Jewish. So I've always had lots of Jewish friends. And I was at a Thanksgiving meal where I was the only Christian person there. And it was fascinating. Well, it wasn't fascinating, but I knew that this might come up. And the person who was hosting the dinner is a really close friend, and she started the Holocaust Center here in Rochester. She does a lot of Yiddish translations, very deeply involved. And I said, well, I was very nervous about going. And I just, well, my job is just to listen, talk, meet people, listen. I knew some people. But it was interesting at one point, one couple, they were sympathetic for the Palestinians. And Sandy said, have you been to those walled cities in Gaza? Do you know what it's like there? And he and his wife started talking, and and they were shut down. You know, and I was sitting here going, oh, this is difficult. Oh, this is difficult.
One moment, I'm going to address Michael. Michael, the class is over, and so I'm going to put you in a waiting room. The class was from noon to 1.
Yeah, so it's it's difficult, even it's difficult everywhere, and I just.
Well, this is informative, and I may go back to this group because I paused the conversation. One of the complicating factors is that, as Rabbi Block said, I don't want to move forward with dialogue that actually could hurt our friendship. So we had a friendship before. This is a difficult time. How do we maintain a friendship on the other side? So they're already at a level of friends. So
it's a friendship. It's a friendship that can continue as long as you don't talk about the elephant in the room.
Right.
I think Sophia faced that. Our mentor, Sophia.
Yeah.
One great friendships, but there was the elephant in the room, and now that elephant is causing great pain.
Yeah.
It's not just a passive elephant, the tusks are rubbing raw the flesh.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, pray for this, and if you have more guidance or wisdom, because I do feel like there's got to be some.
If you want to partner, I know you need to go. If you want to partner with the Cobb Institute and or the Center for Process Studies, I myself want to get started what I call the John Cobb Eco Garden Project. And it's that people get house plants or gardens on their balconies, or if they happen to have a backyard garden, and they dedicate it to the possibility of an eco-civilization where people live in peace and harmony with one another. And then they share on a Facebook, not on a website, their plant. And you can buy little stones for $32 that you can put on next to your plant. I've got 2 tomato plants, by the way. And the stone will say John Cobb Eco Garden. But it can really say anything you want it to say. So the point is, I think if you give people something to do, that's where they feel like they're growing something, it expresses a hope. And and that is important. And they collectively do it.
Jay, would you be, we've got Love Thy Neighbor coming up in September.
I know I don't mean to be over, I don't want to be engaged in a conversation where I'm not really, I don't.
Yeah, it's fine.
I want to be, I can say goodbye if you want.
No, but we love you here, but if you need to go. Hey, think about, Kathleen, think about using your poem for my course as one of your 4. Just think about it.
Which one? I'm sorry.
The poem that you wrote is the project for the course you took with me, the intro.
Oh my goodness, that's so long. I don't know.
Well, a portion of it.
Oh, I have I have kind of a almost ethical, personal.
I got you. I understand.
Bringing my own work.
I know.
I do.
Hey, all I said was think about it. I just said think about it.
I crushed that one.
I talked to Jay about this on the phone before you go, Kathleen. My aunt is receiving an award from 12 to 1 next Wednesday. And so what I'd like to do is take my computer to the place where she's receiving the award, start the Zoom, make you both co-hosts, and then allow y'all to navigate sharing the poems next week. And then I'll, and then y'all can close it up. Would that be something that y'all could handle?
Yes. I will be you and Kathleen will be Kathleen.
Perfect.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. Thank you.
Kathleen will be Sophia being Jay and Kathleen. Yeah.
Last week before from 12 to 1, I actually screwed up my calendar and I was giving an adult poetry writing workshop at a library down the street at 2 o'clock, which is when this ends. I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I had to reserve the room where I was doing that from 1 to 2. And she knew that at 2 o'clock I was going to get off. That's why I had to get off. And then a stream of people came in to write poetry.
That worked. It worked. So
It worked.
It did. It was fun. It was great. So I'll be Patricia and Kathleen is Kathleen, and we'll be fine.
And I'll be there to get us started. So that'll be
all that I know. Are you going to leave, Kathleen, or stay? We're going to talk about this a little bit. You want to stay?
I don't know. I don't want to.
You don't if you have places to go, go ahead. Go ahead and say goodbye.
Okay, I think I'll go ahead and you guys can share ideas. So thank
and I
you.
will as you depart, I will relish the image of you thinking about. No. Thinking about. I almost used it. I was tempted. I think it was very, very good.
Oh, to take it.
Okay. All right.
Take care, both of you.
Okay.
And have a wonderful trip.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So I don't know, Patricia. I don't know. But that's kind of what I'm working on. And I know John Cobb is a foreign name, and that's not something that means anything to anybody but me. But the basic idea that you do something at home that's doable and modest and and growing something and does not require talking about the elephant. It's an expression of aspiration in a tangible way.
I love that. So Love Thy Neighbor is September 5th. And this year, before the service, we're setting up tables out in the breezeway where people can bring information about different things, their religion, share one little idea. And I would love to set up a table, or, I mean, would we start the plants ourselves? Do we get them from somewhere? How does this work?
Where you live, do you have any house plants?
I have a ton, yes.
Okay. Out of curiosity, do you have things outside as well as inside?
Mostly just inside.
Okay. Imagine that you took one of those houseplants. And what do you have? Just name something.
A peace lily.
Okay. And that adjacent to that peace lily, there was a little stone that you purchased that said something like, hypothetically, Peace Garden. And then imagine a website, and so somebody takes a picture of your peace lily with that stone, and then it goes up on a gallery. And underneath that, you can tell about yourself. Hi, I'm Patricia. This is my peace lily. You can tell us anything you want. And so they click if they want to know more about you. You could even include your image by the peace lily. But the point is, imagine a gallery with 20, 200 of those little squares. Let's say about probably 4 across, and you press and you get to learn about them, and they collectively are part of for now we'll call it the Peace Initiative. And what I can do is we have connections in the process world, really kind of all over the world, but that includes mainland China. And so my interest has been to get folks in China and the US to do this. And the way that I can make that happen is John Cobb is so revered in China. They call him an eco-sage, that while we need to avoid the kind of political things, that's why I came up with the John Cobb Eco Garden, because he's such a huge name there. But I think it could be stretched a bit in a way that makes it accessible to everybody and not just John Cobb fans. There's some way to frame it where it will ring true to the process world interested in ecological civilization and just and sustainable and joyful communities, and other people who don't care about process thought, but that aspiration is theirs as well.
I love it.
It's beloved community with ecology added.
Yeah, I think that's great. I would love to try to make that happen, and what we would imagine it to be.
I think it needs somebody with your energy and your charisma and your organizational skills and your kind of can-doism that would spearhead it and bring on, partnered with others. So it's not solo, it's partnered. And so in my world now, that process world, it may sound funny, but people actually do know about the Interfaith Center of Arkansas. Well, look, you've got some people in Canada that now do. I mean, so, and so it would make a little sense, the Interfaith Center of Arkansas, in partnership with the Cobb Institute, the Center for Process Studies, the Bethlehem Center, Medina. Is sponsoring this, and you need some kind of creative way of naming it. It kind of comes down to Home Gardening for Peace Initiative. And the value of home gardens is that they can be indoor or outdoor. They can be nothing more than one plant, or it can be a plot. And in the Chinese context, most people live in apartments with balconies. So, and in urban settings, you know, so it can be done in Brooklyn and Beijing in principle. So it's finding a brand that's attractive and that piques the imagination. And then it's finding somebody to create the web page that has those skills. And then someone to develop promotional materials and promote. And gradually build up the gallery. And so then you could say to your, you know, back home in Little Rock, you could say to your friends at Medina and your friends at Temple B'nai Israel, how's your garden going? and you can trade tips. You know, I'm mad as hell at you, but I still would like to know how you grow your tomatoes.
That's great. And it could even live on our website, possibly.
Yeah, it's there is. Are you at a terminal now?
Yes.
And you have time, right? A little bit.
Sure.
Well, we'll go to Cobb Institute just for a second.
Okay.
And I will too. Let's see if I can. Yeah, and you're there, right?
My computer is loading very slowly. Okay, I'm there.
Okay, so I'm trying to get there myself. Are you at the home page? That's what I'm trying to find.
Yes.
Okay, I'm there too. Go to offerings and go to cohorts. And under cohorts, you'll scroll down and you'll see eco gardening.
Got it.
Growing a relational world together. And click on that just for a second. And you'll see the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's very cool.
And so they are interested too. And part of what they want is maybe to use their website, but I've not committed to that. And part of it is because theirs is kind of complicated. Have you ever heard of Mighty Networks?
I'm seeing that now. Yeah. No,
And
I've never.
it's too many clicks, and it's too many clicks. And so what we need is, and also I don't know that they have anybody that can actually monitor it. But anyway, so you really need somebody. They've got the idea, eco gardening for a better world, or whatever they called it there. But I think whoever really wants to run with it can run with it, and they would partner with them. I don't think they have such investment now that they have a sense of ownership. They want to see it happen, but they don't have anybody like you, actually. But you see the idea. You get the idea of the cohort. So this is kind of an interfaith cohort, you might say.
I love the word cohort.
Yeah.
That's a good word.
Yeah.
It's like we're in cahoots.
Yeah, right. You know, again, like I'm mad as hell at you, but how do you grow those tomatoes?
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, we'll have our Love Thy Neighbor planning committee soon, and I'll bring this up to them. We're kind of working.
And come up with a name. If you can use any of that language you see in the eco gardening cohort, I've already clicked out of there, so I don't kind of forgotten how they put it.
But you've said some good words: peace garden for hope, or home gardening for peace, or
yeah.
That's the gist.
I think the phrase home gardening, if you can find a way to get that included, that gives an image of the practice. And then you need some kind of icon that can be attached in some kind of way to whatever you're growing so that you can get an image of it.
And I wonder if I could contact the Nature Conservancy or one of our local community gardens and see if they would start me 200 little seedlings that would be ready for September for something to be able to actually give away. Yeah. So
if you ran with that, I think I could get the Cobb Institute and the Center for Process Studies and some other folks to really sign on to it. As long as they were profiled as partners or affiliates or whatever. And like what I'm saying, I think Arkansas Interfaith now has some brand name recognition in those circles.
Nice to hear.
Interfaith Center, I never get it right.
Well, those names are awfully close. There's Interfaith Alliance and Interfaith Arkansas and Arkansas Power. There's too many things. So.
Okay. Well, blessings to you, and thanks so much. And you're a great leader. I really, you manage these really well.
Thank you. I'm so glad we're doing this together.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I just found out that you were Sarah Hinman's advisor. Do you remember Sarah?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's working with, doing a lot of stuff with us now. She's doing a lot of volunteer stuff with us now. So, good, yeah, she's a good one. Anyway, your name came up yesterday.
Yeah, okay.
With great love, always.
Well, wrongly placed, but I'll take it anyway.
You've earned it. You've earned it. All right,
Okay.
I'll see you soon.
God bless. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.